Hey, Smarter News. Today we're going to entitle our segment Something to Consider. You might notice that on our card stacks, every once in a while, we have a card that's entitled Something to Consider. And I actually think this is a really important part of reporting because very few stories have a very neat beginning, middle, and end. Oftentimes they just have a beginning and they just keep on developing. And along the way, you learn some really interesting things. And those facts or opinions or perspectives are important to consider as you're continuing to watch this story. And of course, I want to share the most interesting stuff with you. And so that's why we have that important card, Something to Consider. So today we have a couple big stories that we're going to be watching. We don't know how all of them are going to turn out, but we do have a few things for you to consider as you continue to see headlines about these topics. So the first topic we're going to talk a little bit about has to do with the new coronavirus. We are going to talk about the new variant in just a moment, but I want to tell you about what's happening with the FDA today. The FDA Advisory Committee is going to be considering this new antiviral pill by Merck for emergency use authorization. We've talked a little bit about this. The initial data for this antiviral pill seemed to be very promising, showed a 50% reduction in severity of illness. In the weeks that have followed, though, the efficacy has dropped to about 30%, and that's important. There's also been more concerns about potential side effects like birth defects or even potentially cancer. And there's also another part of this. So remember, antivirals, the purpose of them is a fewfold. One, antivirals would allow us to give somebody a prescription. They're able to not hopefully have severe illness or a long illness from COVID-19. And hopefully, if that's the case, not only are they sick less and for a shorter period of time, but they also don't spread this virus a lot amongst the community because their illness is shorter and they're able to be treated. So this is really key. So much of our coverage just really focuses on those vaccinated, those unvaccinated, but therapeutics are really important. And you should know there's a lot of developments coming on this horizon of antivirals. This is just one of them. And this is a concern specific to this particular one. So most antivirals, what they're doing is they're stopping the virus from replicating. We don't want the virus to replicate. If it gets into our body, it starts replicating. Our body says, wait, whoa, what is this inside my body? Starts fighting it with an immune response. That's how you get symptoms, and that's how you can get ill or severely ill. So we want to stop the virus from replicating, and most antivirals, that's what they do. For this particular one, what it does is it introduces an air into the way that the virus is replicating. And there is some concern by a few doctors that this air that it's introducing does stop the virus from replicating in a typical way, but could spin off a mutation that could lead to another variant. And so that is specific to this particular antiviral. It's something to watch, especially since we're focusing so much on this new variant out of South Africa. On the new variant out of South Africa, some of you have asked about the doctor there. One of the doctors that first identified and is first talking about the symptoms that she's seeing related to those with this particular variant. She's talked about this as being sort of mild illness, like very strange sort of fatigue and body aches, a little bit of a scratchy throat, not the cough and the fever that you might necessarily associate with someone that gets COVID-19. So she's really encouraging doctors, if someone shows up with what's described as malaise, to test them for COVID, even if they don't fit the typical profile. So yes, she is saying that most of the cases she's seeing with this variant are mild and are in younger people. She's also saying that that's typical for a new variant, that you might see it in younger people, and we don't really know how it's going to develop from here. So that's why it's important for doctors to be aware that maybe this variant is going to show itself in a few different ways. This is an important time also to note, though, that we have to remember that most of the people who get the virus that causes COVID-19 recover. You know, they may get sick, but the vast majority of people recover from this virus. And I think that can get lost in some of the concern about new variants and new treatments and where this is all headed. I mean, obviously that concern is valid. We've all lived through the last 2 years. So that's a little bit of what you should know, something to consider about the virus, the variant, and a new potential treatment that the FDA is considering today. All right, switching gears a little bit, something to consider about a big court case that we're watching in New York City. This is the federal case against Ghislaine Maxwell. She's the socialite that is charged with sex trafficking and a whole host of other charges related to that. And what these charges really circle around is her activities allegedly with Jeffrey Epstein. He's somebody else who is facing charges that were very serious and committed suicide while in prison. Obviously, there's lots of questions about his death. I'm sure you've seen some of the different theories about that. But here we are today. Ghislaine Maxwell is facing these charges. Her court case began yesterday in New York City. And here's something to consider about this. You've seen a lot of high-profile court cases recently, whether it's the Kyle Rittenhouse trial that we saw in Wisconsin or the men charged with the death of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. We've seen these trials play out live on camera. And what's really important to note is when it comes to federal cases, this is laws dating back decades, you're not going to see broadcasts. It's very, very rare that you're going to see anything from a federal case. So you're not going to be able to watch this. And that is going to be a major difference in how you're seeing some other cases that we've covered play out. Some of you have asked me why you don't see this story getting more national news coverage. And listen, I don't have a great explanation for editorial judgments made by other news or media organizations. We're going to be covering this story. The trial is expected to last for several weeks, and so we have a lot in front of us. Something to consider in all of this, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that this is an element that I've learned from my experience in broadcast news, is that when you have less elements, so you have less photography, less video, less of these sound bites to replay and replay again on the news, that tends to downgrade stories from getting the time that other stories will get. So that could be a factor here. It's important to note that Ghislaine Maxwell denies all these allegations against her. They are very serious, but she denies them. And her lawyer says that she's a scapegoat for these allegations against Jeffrey Epstein. We have linked on our website the original indictment against her with all these charges listed, so you can see the specific reasons for why the federal government brought these charges against her. So we'll continue to watch this case, bring you updates as we see fit, and keep you updated on all these developing stories and more on smarternews.com. So questions and comments, let me know, and always more on our website. Have a great day.